This is one of the most frightening jokes in the history of economics. Great catastrophes can kill millions of people, but they almost never kill opportunity. The Black Death was no exception. Between 1347 and 1351, the plague spread rapidly and swept across Europe and North Africa with a brutality humanity had never witnessed before. Entire towns vanished overnight. Families were erased from the map, and nearly half of Europe's population ceased to exist. But behind these unimaginable losses, something else was quietly happening. Money was being redistributed on a scale that makes even modern recessions seem insignificant. The old order was collapsing. Money was changing hands. And some of the most influential families in European history were rising from the ashes of disaster. Talking about this somehow feels absurd. While a catastrophe that killed tens of millions was unfolding, some families were becoming richer than ever. This is one of the most disturbing events in economic history. When a system collapses, someone inevitably profits from the collapse. The Black Death did not merely damage the system, it shattered it. The plague did not only kill peasants, merchants, and craftsmen, it killed heirs, it eliminated landowners, it wiped out the biggest competitors of the banks, it overthrew noble families that had ruled for centuries. And when the old holders of money lose, new holders of money emerge, not because they are evil people, but because ambition becomes irresistible against a broken system. To understand who increased their wealth during the Black Death, you must imagine Europe at its most vulnerable moment. Ships arriving in Genoa carried only dead sailors. Priests said the bells no longer rang, because there was no one left to ring them. Entire living spaces were emptied overnight. Documentaries usually stop here. But when the subject is history and finance, this is exactly where it begins. Because the economic impact was not temporary, it permanently changed the structure. We cannot look at the plague merely as people died. Class divisions changed. Labor shortages destroyed the foundations of feudalism. Abandoned lands created a vacuum of ownership. Trade connections collapsed and had to be rebuilt. Banks that could not collect debts went bankrupt, leaving gaps in financial systems. And from every one of these gaps, new winners emerged. The most important question was this: who became rich and how? To answer this, we must follow a trail historians often overlook: the trail of money, intersections, power, and hidden opportunities. In a world where half of Europe's competitors were no longer alive. The primary truth is this: some of the most important names in European history associated with art, banking, nobility, and empire owe their rise to the economic vacuum created by the plague. And the clearest example of this is Florence. By the late 14th century, as the plague receded in waves and returned again, Florence was known as the city of survivors. Competitors were dead, trade networks had collapsed, banks were barely holding on to avoid bankruptcy. And at this moment, a man named Giovanni de' Medici stepped forward. He was not a noble. He was not a giant. He was simply an exceptionally clever banker with perfect timing. Giovanni founded the Medici Bank in 1397, shortly after the second major wave of plague that disrupted Florence's financial order. Most traditional banking families had lost heirs, partners, or entire branches of operation. Once dominant powers like the Bardi and Peruzzi families were shadows of their former selves. Giovanni masterfully filled this banking vacuum. The Medici Bank secured extremely profitable contracts, one of them being the financial administration of the papacy. Without the plague wiping out all competitors, such an opportunity would never have existed. This was not limited to banking alone. Because of demographic collapse, the number of nobles and merchants competing for political influence also declined. The Medici family rose into positions of economic and civic leadership. Without the plague, the Medici would likely have remained merely a successful Florentine family. Instead, they became patrons of Renaissance art, producers of popes, rulers of Tuscany, and architects of modern finance. You could even argue this: Michelangelo owed part of his career to the Black Death. But this transformation was not unique to Florence. The city of Milan experienced an even more dramatic evolution. The long-established Visconti family not only survived the plague, but weaponized the power vacuum it created. When noble families lacked heirs, which happened constantly during a pandemic with a 60% mortality rate, their lands reverted to higher nobles or were seized by cunning rivals. The Visconti were masters of this game. Bernabo Visconti aggressively expanded Milan's territory by seizing lands of families wiped out by the plague. His son, Gian Galeazzo Visconti, used strategic marriages and demographic chaos to accumulate enough land and power to be declared Milan's first duke in 1395. In another era, such territorial expansion would have taken centuries. After the Black Death, it happened in a remarkably short time. If there were a competition for exploiting inheritance collapses, the Visconti would be strong contenders. Across the English Channel, England witnessed the rise of an entirely new class: upwardly mobile provincial gentry, families who were not noble but suddenly gained enough land and wealth to become political actors. The fact that they are less famous than the Medici or Visconti makes their stories even more compelling. Take the Paston family, for example. They began as modest landholders in Norfolk, but when neighboring estates lost heirs during plague outbreaks, they purchased these lands at massive discounts or seized them through legal claims. Sudden wealth gave them access to education, courts, and royal patronage. Within generations, they became power holders. Their rise is documented in detail in the famous Paston letters. There were others as well. The de la Pole family rose rapidly by combining trade profits with abandoned post-plague lands. The Nevilles, who would later play a central role in the Wars of the Roses, expanded their wealth by exploiting plague-created vacancies in the northern aristocracy. Even the Stanleys rose thanks to plague-era land opportunities, long before becoming kingmakers at the Battle of Bosworth. The economic shock of the Black Death was not limited to Florence, Milan, or England. The deeper you examine the destruction of 14th century Europe, the clearer a pattern becomes. Wherever death created a shortage, someone stepped in to fill it. Sometimes a noble dynasty, sometimes a merchant family, sometimes an institution composed of members without heirs, bound by vows of poverty. The plague did not discriminate, but wealth certainly did. To see this more clearly, we must look north, to the icy ports of the Baltic. There, the Hanseatic League turned crisis into opportunity. The Hanseatic League was not a state. It was a network of trading cities stretching from Lübeck to Riga to Bruges, a cartel. As the plague ravaged Europe, needs became more complex. Grain harvest fell, maritime trade faltered, prices of basic necessities soared. Hanseatic merchants entered this chaos, knowing that profit lay in supplying essential goods. While others declared bankruptcy, families in cities like Lübeck, Danzig, Goslar, and Wismar expanded their fleets. They bought grain cheaply from plague-free eastern regions and sold it at enormous profits in plague-stricken western cities. They monopolized timber and salt, vital for rebuilding Europe. Control over these essentials translated into political influence in city councils. In a Europe where much of the workforce had vanished, the Hanseatic League grew wealthy by supplying what survivors could no longer produce. Across Europe, there were other winners as well. Institutions that survived even as people died, Monasteries, churches, and religious orders became the largest landowners in Europe after the plague, not because they bought land, but because land flowed to them. When families had no heirs, when aging nobles donated estates in exchange for spiritual salvation, when people surrendered everything in hopes of divine protection, the Church absorbed land like a sponge. The Cistercians in France and the Benedictines in Germany expanded their wealth dramatically during and after the plague years. Selling spiritual salvation during an era of mass death was extremely profitable. These were not merely religious institutions. They were rent collectors, producers, and systems that shaped local economies. Beyond all romantic notions of medieval piety, the Black Death shows us something simpler. When people panic, they invest in what they believe is eternal, yet the families who exploited financial chaos most effectively were Italian banking families. Names like Medici, Strozzi, and Pazzi did not emerge from nowhere. They rose in a hollowed-out banking system emptied by plague-induced credit defaults. Europe's former international financiers, the Bardi and Peruzzi families, had already collapsed under unpaid royal debts before the plague. The pandemic finished the job. Their branches in Avignon, Bruges, and Constantinople disappeared. Into this financial fire stepped second-tier families, suddenly promoted by the system through available opportunities. The Strozzi family rebuilt its fortune by investing in land sold for pennies. The Pazzi family expanded merchant banking after demographic collapse. The plague did not guarantee success. It guaranteed the end of potential competitors. In the medieval economy, the death of an heir meant the death of a bank. None of these families are unknown today, but how they became rich is rarely told. Death, scarcity, consolidation, and opportunism combined. Surviving workers, laborers, and peasants were also clear winners. For the first time, their bargaining power increased. Labor scarcity raised wages. Serfs demanded better conditions or abandoned feudal ties. Laws were passed to suppress wage growth. The Statute of Laborers of 1351 is the clearest example. But laws could not stop incentives. Wages rose anyway. Social mobility increased. Guilds opened to new members. Apprentices became masters much earlier. This was not elite wealth, but it was the greatest labor boom medieval Europe had ever seen. Almost a revolution born from demographic collapse. Yet to grasp the Black Death's greatest lesson, we must look beyond the Middle Ages, because what happened in the 14th century was not unique. It was the template of crisis economics. Money does not disappear in disasters, it changes hands. This pattern repeats after every major collapse. During the 2008 crisis, distressed debt investors and private equity gained power. During COVID-19, billionaire wealth increased by trillions, while small businesses closed. Methods change, systems do not. That is why studying the winners of the plague is not historical curiosity. It is a general warning. Crises are not equalizers, they are accelerators. They amplify advantages. They reward those with liquidity, connections, and adaptability. The Black Death did not merely kill Europe. It reshuffled Europe's money and power cards. It paved the way for the Renaissance. It altered England's political order. It strengthened the Hanseatic League. It expanded the Church's economic reach. It reshaped banking from Florence to Bruges. There is a hidden irony here. The plague thought to have ended the world created the world that followed. From destruction came mobility. From loss came opportunity. From chaos emerged mechanisms that still affect us today. The lesson is not comforting, but it is clear. Disasters do not distribute money equally. They generate massive advantages, and whether those advantages become progress or destruction depends entirely on who rises. If you do not understand how wealth behaves in crises, you will never understand how power is formed. If this narrative gave you a new perspective, subscribe to our channel. I will expand your vision with stories of finance and history,